डेथ पेनल्टी के इस नए आयाम को शामिल करने के बाद मैं विनती करूंगा श्री के त्यागराजन से, जो कि तमिल नेशनल लिबरेशन मूवमेंट के जनरल सेक्रेटरी हैं. So in the end, I would like to call Shri P. Suresh ji. वो पेशे से लॉयर हैं, नेशनल जनरल सेक्रेटरी हैं PUCL के, और एक्टिवली इन्वॉल्व हैं पीपल्स मूवमेंट में. इसके साथ साथ वो मूवमेंट अगेंस्ट स्टेट रिप्रेशन के खिलाफ बोलते हैं, और जितनी भी दूसरी एंटी पीपल मूवमेंट और ख़ास तौर पर जो एंटी न्यूक्लियर पावर प्लांट मूवमेंट थी तमिलनाडु में, उसमें बहुत सक्रिय रहे हैं. सुरेश जी इसके साथ साथ वो लीथल लॉटरी रिपोर्ट उन्होंने निकाली है. सो सुरेश जी को विनती है कि वो आकर अपनी बात करिए. जी सुरेश जी.
Friends, first off, congratulations to the CDRO, CUDR in particular, for organizing this meeting. It was called in a context in which they thought Supreme Court may go against them. We may have to fight 15 people being hanged. But the background has changed. But it's only changed slightly. It has only changed with regard to those 15 people. The larger context of death penalty still remains in the book. The question mark about death penalty has not gone away. The whole issue of the legality and the constitutionality of death penalty still remains. And the challenge before all of us is, what do we do now? There's much to be very happy about the 21st January ruling. But that's a very small consolation if you look at the larger number of issues. Because between 2007 and 2013, at least about 40-50 death penalty cases have been cleared by the Supreme Court, and at least about 20-25 of them, death penalty has been confirmed. The next time around, the government is not going to take so long. Particularly, Pranab Mukherjee has still 2.5 years' time. So we are all going to be very busy on our feet. I would like to start off with two personal anecdotes to highlight how we in the PUCL have been looking at it, and I personally have been involved in the death penalty. Way back in 1994, I was arguing a Tada case, the RSS bomb blast case. In the background of the Babri Masjid demolition, there were 4 major blasts in the country. One was Bombay, one was Hyderabad, third was Calcutta, and the fourth was Madras. So the Madras RSS bomb blast case, a lot of Muslims had been arrested. I was appearing for them in the court. In one of the hearings, a prolonged hearing, and it was very difficult. It was like hitting your head against a wall. And we were arguing for bail, and at that time I had a very dubious distinction of being the first person to get people out on bail in Tada, in Tamil Nadu, and among the first in the country. But this was after a marathon argument of about 4 months. Halfway through the arguments, everybody else lost interest. The judge had to hear me, I had to argue, and the accused was there. One day in the afternoon, after every day, about 3 hours, I was arguing. The judge asked me, he was a Hindu. He just said, everybody has gone. I want to ask you a personal question. So I was wondering what? I mean, I had all these books with me and arguing, and he said, you know all these Muslim prisoners? I said, yeah. They're all Muslims, no? I said, yeah. They're not converted now? No. From what I knew, they were not recent converts. I believe that these Muslim prisoners take the blood of the Hindus and sprinkle on them, because that is their way of showing how much they feel about the Hindus. What do you think? Now I was very shocked. Now by reflex action, I did not think. It was just the anger inside me for something as, what do you call this? Preposterous, stupid? What do you call this? A judge, he's a judge, he's hearing the case. So I told him, I also whispered, sir, can I tell you something? I'll tell you a secret. So he said, what? You know what these Muslim people do? They'll take all that blood and they'll make biryani out of it and they'll feed each other. Friends, I'm not talking out of my head. This happened in a court. The judge said, he realized I was making a fool of him. He said, how dare you do this? This is a court, it's justice, sanctity of the court. I will take contempt action. You know how they all throw that. I said, please do. This is my name, this is my registration number, this is please do that. He said, oh, why did you do that? I said, if you can tell that the Muslim prisoners take the blood and put it on them, Why can't I tell them that they make biryani out of the blood that you said they have taken? I have not said they have taken. You have said that they have taken. Now it went on in this way, but it was a very hard lesson for me. That ultimately, evidence which is going before the judges is going to be judged by people based on how they understand things. What is the social bias of the judge? What is the political bias of the judge? What is his perspective? Which background does he come from? How does he understand things? Play an extremely important affair in the way ultimately the criminal justice system operates. The second, this is a completely disconnected, disparate. 1995, two prisoners who were sentenced to death wrote to the PUCL. PUCL has a long record of fighting against death penalty, and in Tamil Nadu we have been doing it for a long time. So they wrote to us saying, we have been sentenced to death. Our lawyer had taken money. He is a radical lawyer, a very well-known colleague of ours, political person. He had taken money. He had not appeared for a single day on cross-examination, and the matter went on. And sometimes the judge asked these people because he got angry. They had to ask something, and ordinary people, what do they know about cross-examination? They asked something, and they got convicted to the death sentence. They said, "Can PUCL come in?" We went into the case, and we were shocked. We were shocked at the type of. And I would like to tell Professor, this was not a legal aid lawyer. He took money. He was a radical left lawyer, and his advice to them is, anyway you're going to get a death penalty. So you don't have a lawyer. Then when you go to the High Court, you will get advice that you have not been given enough legal advice, and that will be a ground for commuting the death penalty to life sentence, because anyway you can't get out of it. A small child who was being killed. It was very difficult to handle this. This was a fellow lawyer, a lawyer from the movement, lawyer we know, he's still practicing, we know him very well. But this was a real knock on the head. And at a personal level, it was also a very big question. The third, all these three things are documented, so it's not I'm talking out of my imagination. The third was a case, the second case was a case of Mohan Rangan Gopi, whose death penalty was finally commuted just last year. The third was a person called Govindasamy, and he had been convicted for killing 5 people. The trial court had acquitted him, complete acquittal. The High Court, when it came to the High Court, there was actually a literally mad judge. He's a mad judge, I mean, there's no other word for him. He handled that case. He upturned a case from the trial court which was acquitted into death penalty. And if this madness was not enough, it went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court also upheld it. And they upheld the whole thing. Although at that time, there was a very clear ruling that if any one of the courts had not found the evidence fit enough for death penalty, then it is not safe to give death penalty, even if you are overturning the acquittal. This was the third incident happening around the same in the 90s. And of course, the final one, this is more an incident that the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case, 26 accused, jumbo death, omnibus sentence is what it was called, all 26 sentenced to death. Now we started working on this, as we did very many things. Then we realized we can't approach it in a business as usual method. Because every time we went and opened our mouth in the courts, the court will say, you Jholawala, you only want to oppose death penalty. You have a press meeting, the media, half of the media will be talking to you, half the media will not like what you're saying. And when we go to talk to people, I'm sure all the people here are all people who believe in the same thing. We are talking to ourselves. The challenge is, how do we go outside and change people from outside? How do we change their views? How do we make them believe that death penalty is in its very essence anti-human rights? Is anti-human, forget right part. The moment you say right, people's, ordinary person's mind goes off wonky. It's something that is unsafe, you can't go into that. That was the challenge we had. Friends, from these very concrete experiences, we learned the hard way that while we oppose death penalty in conferences like this, we also have to oppose death penalty in a way in which Yup Chaudhary spoke in the afternoon. He really kicked all of us in the bottom sides. Thanks, Yup. We needed that kick. We needed the kick so that we don't become complacent, because we constantly become complacent. The moment we get one death penalty commuted, then we go back, sit back until the next hanging is to take place. I have taken part in stopping 4 hangings. And I wish that I will never have one more hanging. It's the worst experience you can have. 6 o'clock is hanging, 12 o'clock the previous night, you're running here, running there, trying to get it stopped. It's not an easy experience. Therefore, the question before all of us comes in, how do we therefore create a campaign in which we don't talk to the converted, we talk to convert people. And that is where studies like what they are doing in NLU and other studies becomes extremely important. That is what pushed Pius here to say, let's look into the death penalty judgments. Let's look into how the Supreme Court and the High Courts have been dealing with the death penalty. Since morning we have been talking about the fact that bulk of the people on death row are people who are caste poor or who belong to the Muslim community or to the very weaker sections of society. The rich people don't go. Now what is the basis on which we can say this? Do we have any findings? Do we have any study? That became the starting point for about 10, 12, 13 years back when POC said, let's look at the Supreme Court judgments for three things. And while trying to figure out a methodological framework for study, we took what Justice in the Kartar Singh case, where the dissenting ruling, they said judges ultimately are the ones who determine the evidence that is placed before them. And Justice Bhagwati very beautifully wrote in that judgment saying, ultimately for one judge, the Naxalites who kill people are terrible creatures who should be exterminated, while some other judges would say that they are misguided youth who perhaps in the means that they adopt are not adopting the proper ones. But between these two sets of people are the facts that come before the court. That gave us the first clue to start the study. So we did a study of the Supreme Court judgments between 1950 till 2006. That has come out as a book called Lethal Lottery. This is in the web. Any of you can kindly look at it. As far as I know, this is the only book based on a research method which looks into the entire aspect of the Supreme Court ruling on death penalty. I would just like to talk about 2 or 3 issues. Because after the book was released in 2007, 2008, the Supreme Court used that book to commute death penalty in 5 cases. They named it in 3 cases. It's being used as a thing in another 2 or 3 more cases. That is the power that you have if you are coming out with a convincingly good research with which we can go to the courts. The issue that we looked at in the judgments were threefold. One, that death penalty is extremely arbitrary. The second and the third part are a little more difficult. That death penalty is capricious. That is, it is very singular in terms of how it is affecting people. So we took up this issue of arbitrariness and said, how do we break down what is arbitrary so that even a common person can understand what arbitrary is? Now, after the 2008 book, 2006 book, the research that came out in 2008, we have just now finished compiling all the Supreme Court judgments between 2007 till 2013. Only the January judgment we have to analyze. Analysis is almost over. I will just want to share with you 3 or 4 key issues that have come up in the study. The first is the fact that the Supreme Court, in a case called Maya Kaur Bhadev Singh and versus it's a Madhya Pradesh case. Let me quote to you what the Supreme Court has said, because it's very useful for us to understand how the thinking of the judges go. Unfortunately, the facts predominate, but the predilection of a judge is a human factor. But as judges applying the law, we must be alive to the needs of society and the damage which can result in a ghastly crime if it is not dealt with in an effective and a proper manner. And then they will go on to say, the same case, judges tend to deal extremely harshly in cases dealing with communal murder, while they are conservative and apologetic when dealing with caste crimes. In effect, what the Supreme Court was saying in 2007 is what Bhagwati said in 1980. Which is to say that ultimately what matters between a case which goes before one judge and another judge is a lottery. Those who are practicing in courts will know there are judges who are said to be committing types. There are judges who are corrupt types. You know, there's this very nice thing, they'll say, my lord, I'm giving you, I have very heavy basis on this for my argument. The other man will say, my lord, my arguments are much more heavy. And this is a joke that is used to be said, and the heavy part is the amount of money which are inside. So there are judges who take money, there are judges who you can approach because of caste, community and other things. There are judges who are straightforward but very conservative. There are judges who are corrupt but very open, and there are judges who are honest. So it's a whole range of judges. Before which judge it goes is a matter of lottery. So ultimately the entire thing boils down to a lottery, whether a person will survive or not. Now the question therefore before all of us as civil society is, can we show that there is actually a lottery happening? How do we show that with the same similar set of facts? Because no two crimes have the same set of facts. By its very definition, it has to be separate. So it is in this context that the Supreme Court has said, ultimately it's a human factor of the judges when they analyze the evidence. And this human factor is what predominates. And not I am saying, because I just quoted straight away from what the Supreme Court is saying. Now let's look at 2-3 concrete examples. Now when it comes down to cases where Hindutva is the basis for the crime, like for example the Dara Singh case. Horrible crime. The Staines and his 2 sons were in a car and they set alight the car. They set afire the car and all the 3 died. They are not allowed to come out. In that case the Supreme Court says, no, this is part of an anti-religious fervor. They only wanted to teach these people a lesson so that they will not convert innocent tribals into Christianity. And what happened was by way of an accident. And therefore, in the case of Dara Singh, they confirmed the High Court, which commuted the death sentence of the trial court. Now, in contrast, there are crimes involving the lower caste. And when those cases come, Supreme Court suddenly discovers, no, this is a matter shocking, the collective conscience. And of course, we have the classic example of Afzal Guru. The collective conscience of whose collective, whose conscience. There are 2 parts to it. Whose collective and whose conscience? Which collective or which conscience? Now these are very problematic questions when the court uses that as the basis to finally say that we think death penalty should be imposed. Now it is in this part that we need to notice 2 other things. When it comes down to clear-cut cases where there is clear evidence in the court, that is one part of the argument. The other is when there is circumstantial evidence. A matter of circumstance is something which ultimately depends on the judge, the way they are viewing it. And the Supreme Court has said very, very clearly, this is very implicit, for example, when you look at gender crimes. When it comes down to gender crimes, like for example honor killing, in a case which went from Maharashtra in 2010, there was this man who killed his sister and a paramour and 2-3 other people because it was an intercaste marriage. And the court said, of course, there is a wrong thing that has happened, but it is arising out of genuine caste considerations, and the murder is an outcome of marriage with so-called low caste. Now look at the words that is being used. And this is the Supreme Court saying it, no other court. So-called lower caste. Which is the so-called lower caste? And how do you then justify killing of that people? In Graham Staines, you say it is anti-religious fervor meant to attack conversion. Here you are saying it's a lower caste, and therefore there is nothing wrong with it. But however, in other major caste cases which went from Karnataka, which went from several other courts, the court says no, this is extremely shocking. We can't remain quiet when these cases come before us. For example, again on the whole issue of gender and how the social bias of the judge vis-a-vis the economic condition of the accused comes. The Priyadarshini Mattu case is a classic example. Now the Supreme Court makes a distinction between a crime which is a fit of rage and a crime which is premeditated and thought out and planned. The Priyadarshini Mattu case is very clearly predetermined, whatever is maybe the romance part of it. But the fact is, here they said no. It is sufficient if we commute the death penalty into life sentence. Now it is the same type of ruling which the Supreme Court comes about when you look at land disputes. A lot of the cases which go to the Supreme Court from rural areas relate to land dispute. So in a case which went from Haryana, for example, in 2007, there was a property dispute, 5 members of the family were killed. The High Court set aside the death sentence as being unsafe. The wife, in this particular case, the husband and the wife were convicted. The wife sort of repented, wrote a letter to the husband saying what we did was wrong. And she also attempted to commit suicide. Supreme Court said, no. This is not repenting. How do you say he is repenting? He had tried to commit suicide because they wanted to escape culpability. No. This is the case you have to impose death penalty, and they imposed death penalty. But in another case from Punjab, similar circumstances of land dispute, it's Desraj versus the state of Punjab in 2007, almost similar years. They say, of course, a lot of deaths took place. There was a land dispute, there were other disputes, but the convict did not have bad antecedents. He did not have a bad record. Of course, he was not a hardcore criminal. So, it is okay if he commutes the death sentence to life sentence. Now, very clearly, the class basis of the accused does influence the mind of the judge when they look at the particular set of facts. Now, there's no way we can get around it. Last year, if you would have remembered, on the same day, again in another gender-related case of children who are being rape of children killed, in one court, in one case, they held that, of course, it is a gruesome rape and murder of a young child, and death penalty should be imposed because this will have to be a salutary lesson to the rest of society. In another case, on the same week, the same court said, no, the accused is the last male person of his lineage. And if you kill him, then there are no more males in the lineage. We should keep that in consideration, and therefore we are commuting death to life. I'm not saying that acquittal or that commutation should be changed. I'm not saying that at all. Please don't mistake me saying that I'm saying therefore impose death penalty. No, that's not the point. A very limited but a very significant point. Many of these cases you see come around in batches. There are the same set of judges. So if you have Sinha, you have one type of judgments. And if you have like the infamous case of last year, Singhvi, you have another set of judgments. Now, apart from the fact of lottery, there is also a very, very important issue, which is the issue of precedent. I'm sorry, I'm talking legal language, but as citizens, we need to know this part of it. Where is then the precedent value if two judges have two different ways of looking at it? One of the best things that CJI's judgment of last week came, and I think the whole team which is here, we'll have to congratulate them on that, which is Sinha created a new class of offences. Ordinary crimes of mass murder and terrorist murder. Ordinary crimes of mass murder, you can consider delay. Murder like in terrorist crime? No. They are terrorist crimes. They should not go anywhere near terrorism crime. And we already know the very basic dictum in criminal law. And this is a principle for some of the younger lawyers. I would like to say, please write it down. It took me 20 years to understand this principle, that the law defines the offense. The law defines the offense, but the state defines the offender. Ultimately, whether to impose an FIR or not, which section to impose, which law to impose, is left to the decision of the state, and the state is a government ruling at that point in time. So, if this is the basis on which entire ruling comes, in one case they put, because Muslims are involved as accused, they put terrorism, and in another case they say they will not put terrorism. Then, where is the question of equality before law or the equal application of the law? And this precisely was one of the issues which the Supreme Court had recently taken up and said there can be no equal protection of the law. In a case from Maharashtra, Santosh Kumar Bariar versus State of Maharashtra said judicial arbitrariness is an issue of the equal protection of the law. Tyagarajan has come. And the equal protection of the law. Now these are again, friends, not things I am taking out of my head. These are all from different Supreme Court judgments here, there. Now this will come down to the last part of what I would like to share with you, which is to pick on what Prabhat Patnaik talked today in the morning, which is the culture of cruelty. And the culture of cruelty is something that is implicit in the way the criminal justice system functions. But contrary to what our earlier speaker said, I would like to also bring to our attention that it is a much broader issue than just issue of the state and the police. It is also the type of legal aid service that is given. It's also the quality of legal aid that is being given by others who are taking for it. It's a much more complicated question. The issue that comes up before all of us is, in a system which ultimately is so arbitrary. It's arbitrary on account of appreciation of evidence. It's arbitrary in terms of decision on sentencing. It is arbitrary in terms of what is conscience and what is not conscience. It is arbitrary in terms of definition of what is collective and not collective. It is arbitrary in terms of gender. It's arbitrary in terms of caste. It's arbitrary in terms of community. Where can you have a judicial process where you can safely say, before a set of judges, this set of facts will come up with this type of a judgment? It's impossible. And just like to say, from the American Supreme Court, when the original death penalty case came, and there was a swing vote. Justice Collins of the American Supreme Court, his was a swing vote which said death penalty will be constitutional. 20 years later, he wrote in his memoirs, the biggest mistake I have made in my life is to have put that vote in favor of constitutionality, because death penalty is nothing but a machinery of death. And it is the machinery of death that we need to junk. Friends, that is the challenge before us. This machinery of death has the legitimacy of large numbers of people in our country. We will not succeed by going on a popularity campaign and asking numbers of people to support us. That may be not possible. The South African Constitutional Court, when it declared death sentence to be unconstitutional way back in 1994, said it cannot be on the basis, on the altar of popular sentiment that death penalty can be declared unconstitutional. It can be declared unconstitutional only on the basis of civilizational values. It is that we are fighting for. And it is that which is also implicit in our larger fight, which is that we reclaim the whole issue of democratic ethos and civilizational values. That is the larger fight which we will need to go. We will need to go out after today, not talking to ourselves, the converted people. We have to learn the new language of converting masses of people. In that lies our future, in that lies our safety of creating a criminal justice system which will be fair, which will be equalitarian, and which in the end will be just. Thank you.